Cold does not usually have a sound, but in the winter of 1927, in a fold of the Allegheny Mountains, where the sun never lasted more than 3 hours a day, a woman learned that it does. A low, patient creak against wood coming from outside her window at the exact same distance every single night. She started counting. Not sheep, not days. Marks carved into a windowsill. With the tip of a sewing needle, one for every night, something stood at the tree line and did not blink, did not breathe, did not leave. The old families in that hollow had a name for the place long before she arrived, and they never said it after dark. They said something had been sleeping in those ridges since before the first cabin was raised, and that it had simply, finally, opened its eyes. Her name was Ada Marrow. And what you're about to hear is not a story someone made up to scare you. It is her own handwriting, found 60 years later, sealed inside a wall that 2 different carpenters refused to finish. Refused, not couldn't, wouldn't. She wrote every night until the night she stopped. Mid-word, mid-sentence. The ink still wet when they found the page. No body was ever recovered. No grave carries her name. Only footprints in fresh snow that walked in a straight, deliberate line. And then simply stopped existing. Stay with me until the end, because the last 3 words ever written about what took her have never been spoken aloud on camera. Tonight, that changes. Introduction. Before we step into the hollow, I need you to do 3 things, because where this story is going, you don't want to be alone in it. First, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the channel is building an entire archive of true and unexplained American horror, and Ada Marrow's account is one of the darkest pieces we've ever uncovered. Second, hit like, not for me, but because it tells the algorithm to carry stories like this to more people who need to hear them, and every one of you watching keeps this archive alive. Third, and this one matters most tonight, comment below and tell me what country and what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story is traveling, because there is something almost fitting about a woman who spent her final winter feeling utterly alone, isolated in a hollow, no map cared to name properly, now having her words read by thousands of strangers scattered across the entire planet. Wherever you are, London, Sao Paulo, Manila, Toronto, type it below. Let her know she was heard. Now some context. In 1927, rural Appalachia was still, in many places, disconnected from the world in ways that are hard to imagine today. Roads washed out. Mail arrived by horse. Communities policed themselves, buried their own, and rarely spoke of their troubles to outsiders. It is exactly the kind of silence that lets something terrible grow undisturbed for generations, passed down only as a story parents used to keep children close to the fire at night. The journal you're about to hear was recovered decades later during renovations on a collapsed homestead in Pocahontas County. It had been sealed inside the wall itself, not hidden, not dropped, but built into the structure deliberately by hands that were never identified. What it contains is one of the coldest, most disturbing accounts of isolation, obsession, and something watching from the tree line that this channel has ever told. Turn the lights down, put your headphones on. This is Ada Marrow, in her own words.
I have decided to write this down, not because I believe anyone will read it, but because I no longer trust my own memory to hold what is happening to me. If I write it, it becomes real in ink, and ink does not lie the way a frightened mind can. So let me begin simply. My name is Ada Marrow. I am 31 years old. I came to Widow's Hollow 4 winters ago from a place I have stopped mentioning, because every time I did, I watched people's faces rearrange themselves into something between pity and suspicion, and I grew tired of being a stranger twice, once for where I came from, and once for where I ended up. The hollow took me in the way these mountains take in anything that stops moving long enough. Slowly, without ceremony, without any promise that it would ever let me go, I built a garden from soil that fought me at every turn. I kept 6 hens and, for a time, a rooster who did not survive his first winter. I traded eggs for flour with Edith Calloway, who lives less than a mile down the ridge path, and I learned, the way you learn anything out here, that privacy is not rudeness. It is simply how people love each other in a place where the mountains do most of the talking. For 3 years, nothing happened to me worth writing down. I want that understood clearly, because what I am about to describe did not arrive gradually, dressed as something ordinary. It arrived the way winter arrives in these ridges, announced by nothing and then suddenly total. It began on the 11th of October, though I did not know then that it was a beginning. I was hanging laundry near the tree line behind my cabin, the same tree line I had faced every day for 4 years without a second thought, when the hair on my arms rose before my mind had registered anything at all. I turned toward the trees and saw nothing. No deer, no bird startled into flight. Only that particular density of shadow that pine forests hold even in daylight, the kind that makes you feel watched by the architecture of the place itself. I told myself it was nothing. I finished my laundry. I did not look at the tree line again that day, though I felt it looking at me. The second time was 3 nights later. I woke at some hour I could not name, because my clock had stopped, and I have never determined whether it stopped before or because of what happened. I did not sit up. I did not reach for the lamp. I simply lay there, aware, with a certainty that had no evidence behind it, that something was standing at my window, on the outside, in the dark, looking in at me lying in my bed. I did not turn my head. I have asked myself many times since why I did not turn my head, and the only honest answer I have is that some part of me already understood that turning my head would make it real, and I was not yet ready for it to be real. By the end of October, I had stopped denying it to myself. Even if I said nothing to anyone else, something came to the edge of my property most nights, and it did not attempt to hide the fact that it was there. It made no effort at stealth. It simply stood at whatever distance it judged safe and waited for something I could not identify. I began sleeping with a lamp lit, which cost me oil I could not spare, and which changed nothing at all because whatever watched me did not seem to require darkness to do it. I told Edith Calloway on the afternoon of the 3rd of November. I remember the date because it was the last ordinary conversation I would have with anyone in that hollow. I sat on her porch and I said, as evenly as I could manage, that someone was watching me at night, from the woods, every night. She asked what I meant, and I gave her the only honest answer I had. I don't know what it is, I told her, but I know it's there, and I know it's waiting. She suggested a bobcat, an owl, the particular loneliness that mountain winters bring to women living alone. I let her believe I found comfort in these explanations because it was easier than telling her that comfort was no longer available to me. I stopped attending the Sunday gatherings after that. I stopped trading with Edith, though I left eggs on her step twice, out of habit more than generosity. I want to be honest in these pages because there will be no one else to be honest for me. I withdrew not because I stopped caring for the people of that hollow, but because I had begun to suspect, in a place too deep in myself to say aloud, that whatever was watching me had started watching them too, whenever I let them near me, and I could not carry that, not on top of everything else. By the last week of November, I had begun marking the days it appeared on the inside of my window frame with the tip of my sewing scissors, small notches that meant nothing to anyone but me. I am looking at them now as I write this. There are more marks than there are days I remember counting. I do not know how to explain that, so I am simply writing it down the way I promised myself I would. Whatever is coming, I intend for it to be documented, even if I am the only one who ever reads the account of its arrival. From the journal of Ada Marrow, December came in the way it always does in these ridges, without patience, turning the ground to iron overnight. I want to describe, as precisely as I can, what these nights have become, because precision is the only weapon I have left against the part of my mind that wants to convince me I am imagining all of it. I am not imagining it. I have never been a woman prone to imagining things, and I resent, more than I can say, the way fear makes you doubt the one instrument, your own perception, that you have always trusted completely. It comes almost every night now, though never at a fixed hour, which I have come to believe is deliberate. If it arrived at the same time each night, I could prepare myself, brace against it, the way you brace against an expected blow. Instead, it arrives whenever it chooses, sometimes just after dusk, sometimes in the black hours when even the owls have gone quiet, and the unpredictability itself has become its own kind of cruelty, because it means I can never fully rest, not even for an hour, not even when exhaustion makes my eyes burn. I have started to understand its shape, or at least the suggestion of one. It is tall, taller than any man I have known in this hollow, though I have never seen it stand beside anything of known size to measure it properly. It does not move the way a person moves. There is a stillness to it that unsettles me more than motion would, an economy of movement that suggests either enormous patience or something that does not experience time the way I do. When it does move, it does not seem to walk so much as arrive, as though the distance between one position and the next simply collapses without the space in between ever being crossed. I have tried, God forgive me, to see its face. Twice now I have gathered the small, foolish courage required to lift the lamp toward the window instead of shrinking from it. Both times, what I found where a face should be was not darkness exactly, and not featurelessness exactly, but something my mind refuses to hold on to once I look away, the way you cannot hold the shape of a dream once you are fully awake. I have started to wonder if this is a mercy or a cruelty, that I cannot remember what I have seen, only that I have seen it, and that some part of me screamed before I had consciously decided to be afraid. On the 9th of December, I found the first mark on my property that was not made by weather or animal. A series of deep gouges on the trunk of the oak nearest my chicken coop, at a height no bear in this region reaches, arranged with a regularity that felt less like an accident of claws and more like the deliberate marking of territory, or perhaps, and I write this with my hand shaking because it is the thought I like least, a kind of counting. 5 marks. Then, 4 days later, 6. I have begun to understand, with a dread I cannot fully articulate, that it is keeping track of something. I fear it may be keeping track of nights. I fear it may be counting towards something. I stopped sleeping in my bed on the 14th. I moved a chair to the corner of the room, farthest from any window, and I sleep there now, if what I do can be called sleeping, wrapped in the dark wool shawl my mother gave me before she passed, the one thing in this house that still smells faintly of a life before all of this began. I have noticed that I hold on to that shawl, the way a child holds on to a doll during a thunderstorm, as though wool and thread could form any barrier at all against what waits outside. And I know this is foolish, and I do it anyway, because foolish comforts are the only comforts left to me. I have not told Edith about the marks on the oak. I have not told anyone. There is a particular loneliness in believing something impossible and knowing that saying it aloud will only relocate the disbelief from your own mind into someone else's eyes, watching you the way you fear the thing in the woods watches you. I would rather be alone with my fear than watch fear turn into pity on a face I care about. Last night, for the first time, I heard it at the door. Not the window, the door. A weight shifting against the wood, low and patient, and then nothing, as though it had simply decided, having confirmed something, to withdraw and wait for another night. I sat in my chair until the gray light came through the curtains, and when I finally forced myself to open the door, there was a single handprint pressed into the frost on the outer wood. 5 fingers, each one longer than my own hand by a considerable and impossible measure. I am running out of oil for my lamp. I am running out, I think, of the particular kind of courage required to keep pretending, even to myself, that this will resolve into something explainable. I do not know what to call the thing outside my window anymore. I have started, in the privacy of these pages, calling it the Watcher because it needs a name, and because giving it a name, however small a power that grants me, is the only power I currently have. Tomorrow, I intend to walk to Edith's house and tell her everything. Not the abbreviated version I gave her in November, everything. The marks, the handprint, the counting. I do not know if she will believe me. I am no longer certain it matters whether she believes me. I only know that I cannot carry the whole of this alone for one more night, and that some fears are too large for a single mind to hold without cracking under the weight of them. From the journal of Ada Marrow, I did not make it to Edith's house yesterday, and I want to record why, because the reason itself frightens me more than almost anything I have written so far. I woke in my chair before dawn, as I have every day since I stopped trusting my bed, and I found that the door, which I had barred myself, which I checked twice before finally allowing myself to close my eyes, stood open, not forced, not broken, simply open, as though someone or something had turned the bar from the inside with the same unhurried patience it applies to everything else it does to me. I stood in that doorway for a long time before I found the courage to step outside. The snow had fallen lightly overnight, enough to hold an impression, but not enough to bury one. And there, several yards from my door, leading toward the tree line, were footprints. Not the vague indentations I had convinced myself in October might belong to a large animal. These were unmistakably footprints, bare, human in shape, but wrong in proportion, each stride longer than any person could comfortably manage, walking in a perfectly straight line toward the trees, as though drawn there by something with no need to hesitate or reconsider. I followed them. I want to be honest and say that I do not fully understand why I followed them, except that some instinct told me that whatever answer existed to the question of what has been watching me lay somewhere along that line of prints, and I had reached the particular exhaustion of spirit where knowing, even something terrible, felt more bearable than continuing not to know. I followed the prints perhaps 200 yards into the tree line, further than I had gone since October, and there, caught on the low bramble at the edge of a small clearing I did not know existed, was my mother's shawl. I had been wearing it. I remember wearing it the night before, wrapped tight against the cold in my chair. I have no memory of removing it, no memory of walking outside, no memory of anything between closing my eyes in that chair and waking to an open door and a straight line of footprints leading directly to the one possession in this world I would never willingly abandon. I stood in that clearing holding the shawl against my chest, and I understood, in a way that settled into my bones rather than my thoughts, that I had been outside during whatever happened last night, and that I remember none of it. The clearing itself unsettled me almost as much as the shawl. It was not a natural gap in the trees. The undergrowth around its edges had been pressed outward, not cut, not torn, simply displaced with a gentleness that felt more disturbing than violence would have, as though whatever created that space had done so with patience rather than force, the way you might slowly clear a table rather than sweep it clean. At its center, arranged with what I can only describe as intention, were small stones and pale stripped branches, laid in a pattern I did not recognize and could not, even now, fully reproduce from memory, no matter how many times I try to sketch it on this page. I did not stay in that clearing longer than necessary to retrieve my shawl. I walked back to my cabin with a haste I had not allowed myself in weeks, and I barred the door, and I sat in my corner chair, and for the first time since October, I allowed myself to cry, not from sadness exactly, but from the particular terror of realizing that the boundary I had believed still existed between myself and whatever watches me, the boundary of my own walls, my own door, my own conscious will, had been crossed without my knowledge or consent, and that I had no way of knowing how many times this had already happened before I found the proof of it. I did not go to Edith's that day. I told myself it was because the walk had exhausted something in me that needed rest before I could face another conversation. The more honest truth, which I am forcing myself to write because I promised these pages honesty, is that I was afraid of what my own face might reveal if she looked closely enough. Afraid that whatever had walked me into those woods might have left something behind in my eyes that even I could not see, but that she might. That night, for the first time, it did not simply watch. I heard it circling the cabin, slow, deliberate, a presence moving along the perimeter of my walls, the way a man might walk the boundary of land he has recently decided belongs to him. I sat in my chair with my mother's shawl around my shoulders and listened to it pass my window, pause, and continue over and over for what felt like hours. And somewhere in that endless circling, I understood something I had been refusing to understand. It was not choosing whether to come inside. It had already decided that. It was simply choosing when. I write this next part with a steadiness of hand I do not actually feel, because I have decided that whatever happens to me, this account must survive intact, unclouded by the particular hysteria that fear produces in handwriting. If anyone ever reads this, know that I did not go mad. I did not imagine a shape from grief or isolation, or the particular loneliness of a woman alone in a mountain hollow. Something real walked me into those woods while I slept, returned me to my chair, and left my mother's shawl on a bramble as though it were leaving a message. It expected me to understand. I do not understand it. I fear I am running out of time to. From the journal of Ada Marrow, I finally went to Edith 3 days after the shawl, and I told her everything, exactly as I had promised myself I would. She listened the way people listen when they are deciding, in real time, whether the person in front of them has lost something essential to reason, and when I finished, she said the kindest and most useless thing anyone had said to me in this entire ordeal. She said, "Perhaps I needed rest. Perhaps the isolation of the hollow had finally found its way into me, the way it eventually finds its way into everyone who lives alone too long against these ridges." I did not argue with her. I understood, watching her face, that there was no version of my account that would not sound, to a woman who had not lived it, like the unraveling of a mind, rather than the documentation of a threat. I walked home that afternoon with a loneliness heavier than any I had known since arriving in this hollow 4 years ago, because I had finally done the one thing I told myself might save me, told someone everything, and it had changed nothing except to confirm that I would face whatever comes next entirely alone. I do not write this with self-pity. I write it because it matters to whoever eventually reads these pages that I tried. I did not simply surrender to silence. I reached for help, and help, through no fault of Edith's own limited understanding, was not available to me. That night brought the worst storm of the winter so far, a blizzard that sealed my door with drift and made even the short walk to my coop a genuine danger. I remember feeling absurdly a kind of relief at the storm's arrival, as though the sheer violence of the weather might finally be enough to drive even the watcher back into whatever den or absence it emerges from between its visits. I was wrong to feel that relief, and I understood how wrong within the first hour of full dark when I heard it at my door again, closer than it had ever announced itself before, patient against the howling wind in a way that made the wind itself feel like the lesser danger in the room. I do not remember deciding to open the door. I want that understood as clearly as I can manage to write it. I have no memory of the decision, only the sudden awareness of standing in the open doorway with snow lashing sideways into my cabin and something standing at the very edge of what little lamplight escaped into the storm. Tall, motionless, indifferent to the wind in a way that no living creature I have ever known could be. I do not know how long I stood there. I do not know what passed between us. In whatever silence exists beneath the roar of a blizzard, I only know that when awareness returned to me fully, I was back in my chair, the door once again barred from the inside, and my hands were bleeding from small, precise cuts across both palms that I have no memory of receiving. I have decided, against every instinct toward secrecy that has governed me since October, that I must ask someone from outside this hollow for help, because whatever agreement exists between myself and the thing in the woods, I no longer believe I am a full participant in negotiating its terms. 2 days after the blizzard passed, once the roads were passable again, I asked Thomas Calloway to ride to the county seat and bring back anyone willing to listen to an account that I know, even as I request it, will sound like the ravings of an isolated woman losing her hold on reason. He returned 4 days later with a man named Silas Boone, a former deputy from a neighboring county who now works, when work finds him, as the closest thing to an investigator these mountains support. I told him everything, the same account I gave Edith, though I found myself in his presence, adding details I had not shared with anyone. The counting marks on the oak, the handprint in the frost, the cuts on my palms I cannot explain. He wrote everything in a worn leather notebook without visible judgment, which alone made him the first person since October to offer me something resembling comfort. Boone walked my property for the better part of a day. He examined the oak tree and its marks, with a stillness that told me he found them as inexplicable as I had. He walked to the clearing in the woods, though I did not go with him, and when he returned, his face had taken on a quality I recognized immediately because I had worn it myself for weeks. The particular pallor of a man who has just confirmed, against every rational instinct he possesses, that something impossible is nonetheless true. He asked me one question before he left that first day, and it has stayed lodged in my mind since. He asked whether the watcher's visits had begun the moment I arrived in this hollow, or whether they began only recently after years of my presence here passing unremarked. I told him the latter, and I watched something settle behind his eyes, some conclusion he was not yet willing to share with me, and he closed his notebook and told me only that he needed to make further inquiries before he could say anything more. From the journal of Ada Marrow. Silas Boone did not return for 11 days, and I want this account to reflect honestly what those 11 days did to me, because I fear they may be the last I am fully capable of describing with a clear mind. I did not sleep in any meaningful sense during that time. I moved my few remaining candles into the corner where my chair sits, and I burned them past any sensible economy, because darkness had become, by then, a physical dread, rather than merely an absence of light. The watcher came every single night, sometimes at the window, sometimes circling once more at the door, though it did not repeat whatever had happened during the blizzard, and I have come to believe, without being able to fully justify the belief, that it was waiting for something, perhaps for Boone's return, perhaps for something else entirely that I have no language to name. When Boone finally rode back into the hollow, he came alone, without Thomas Calloway, and he asked to speak with me privately, away from Edith or any other neighbor who might overhear. We sat at my table, the same table where I had once shared tea and ordinary conversation with visitors before all of this began, and he told me, with the careful reluctance of a man choosing each word as though it cost him something personal to spend it, what his further inquiries had revealed. He had spoken with the oldest residents of the county, people whose memories stretched back further than anyone else's in the region, and he had found, buried in their recollections, a pattern that had nothing to do with me specifically, and everything to do with this particular hollow. He told me that Widow's Hollow had earned its name not from any widow who lived here, as I had always assumed, but from a much older story, one the elderly residents were reluctant to repeat even to him, about a presence that had inhabited these specific ridges long before any settler built the first cabin, a presence that periodically and without any pattern the old residents could identify chose someone living within the hollow's boundary to watch, to mark, and eventually, in every case they could recall or had heard, recounted from their own parents, to take. He said the word take with particular weight, as though he had chosen it deliberately over other words that might have felt more clinical, more comfortable, and less final. I asked him directly whether he believed any of this had ever been proven, whether any of the people supposedly taken by this presence had ever been found in any condition, anywhere. He was quiet for a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice had lost the professional detachment he had maintained since his arrival. He said that in 3 generations of stories he had gathered, not one person the Hollow's presence had marked in this way had ever been seen again by anyone in any form. He said the searches always ended the same way mine likely would, footprints that simply stopped, objects left as though deliberately, and an absence with no body to grieve and no answer to offer the people left behind. I asked him, because I needed to ask, whether he believed I still had any chance of surviving what was coming. He did not answer immediately. He opened his leather notebook instead, the one I had watched him write in during our first conversation, and for the first time he turned it toward me and let me see what he had written weeks earlier, after speaking with Edith about my final porch conversation with her. The sentence I had confided about the watcher having been here long before I arrived. 3 words, written in his careful, deliberate hand. I will not record here what those 3 words were. I have decided, in what may be one of the last decisions I'm permitted to make freely, that some knowledge should not survive me if I do not survive it myself, and those 3 words are among that knowledge. What I will say is that reading them changed something in Boone's face that had not been there before. A kind of resigned grief that told me, more clearly than any direct statement could have, that he no longer believed there was a way to intervene on my behalf, only, perhaps, a way to ensure that my account did not vanish along with me. He asked if he could take these pages, and I refused him. Not out of distrust, but because I had come to understand, somewhere in the 11 days of his absence, that finishing this account myself, in my own hand, until whatever end awaited me, had become the one act of defiance still available to a woman who had lost every other form of agency over her own life. He left that evening with a promise to return within the week, though something in the way he embraced me before leaving, a gesture entirely out of character for a man of his particular reserve, told me he did not fully expect to find me here when he did. I am writing this final entry by the light of my last candle, in the chair that has become the only safe place I have known for weeks, with my mother's shawl around my shoulders and the sound, even now, of something patient and enormous circling the perimeter of my walls in the dark beyond my window. It has stopped its distant patience tonight. It is close, closer than it has ever allowed itself to be while I remained conscious enough to know it. I want whoever reads this, whenever that day comes, to know that I was not a fool, and I was not mad, and I did not walk willingly into whatever comes for me tonight. I want you to know that I fought in every way available to a woman alone in a mountain hollow with no weapon beyond ink and a shaking hand, to understand what wanted me, and to leave behind proof that I existed clearly and reasoned clearly until the very end of whatever this is. The candle is guttering low now. I can hear it directly outside my...
The journal ends there, mid-sentence, exactly as it was found 60 years later, sealed inside a wall that carpenters restoring the old homestead refused to finish. Ada Marrow was never seen again. Silas Boone's own notes, recovered separately decades later in a county archive, record only that he returned to Widow's Hollow within the week as promised, and found her cabin empty, the candle burned entirely to wax, and the door standing open to the tree line, with no footprints leading away from it in any direction. No official record of Ada Marrow's disappearance survives beyond Boone's private notes. No grave bears her name. The 3 words he wrote in his leather notebook were never recorded anywhere else, and the notebook itself was reportedly destroyed in a fire in 1954, though at least two people who claim to have read it before then have described its final pages as containing something they refuse to discuss for the rest of their lives. Widow's Hollow still exists if you know where to look for it, though the road leading in has not been maintained in generations, and the handful of families who remain in that part of Pocahontas County will tell you, if you ask carefully enough, that something still walks the tree line some nights, patient, unhurried, and that it has never once in 100 years stopped watching.